For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Scott Mason and I'm one of the land services officers at Stirling Council. I'll take you on a bit of a journey today. I don't have a presentation or anything, so it'll be off the cuff, as people who know me know that I usually do. And we'll go on a journey from when I left school to where I am today. And for anyone who's interested in the sectors of sort of fisheries management or environmental conservation, of how they can get to where I am. So I left school when I was 17, a long time ago now. I've just turned 30, and I had an aspiration and a dream of being a farrier. For anyone who's sort of in the equine industry will know what that is. But unfortunately, SRUC Oakridge decided just as I was leaving school that they didn't want to do the course anymore. So that kind of flung that out of the water. I was then decided that I wanted to be a joiner, and I left school and went on to Forth Valley College and done a year's pre-apprenticeship scheme as a joiner. The building trade then fell away and I couldn't get an apprenticeship in that. I was then out of work for about sort of 8 to 10 months, and I then secured a sort of Christmas temp job in retail, which I absolutely hated, and looking back now, I don't know how I stuck it for the 12 months that I did. I then seen a job advertised on My Job Scotland for Stirling Council for an apprentice countryside ranger. And, you know, my background is I've always been interested in outdoors, involved with racehorses, always done a lot of fishing. So I thought, wait a minute, this sounds a bit interesting. So I've done some research and made some inquiries and realised that this was right up my street. So I applied for the job, and I started with Stirling Council Ranger Service as their very first apprentice in January 2012. It was a 2-year course, and through that I actually was done my SVQ, part of it with Mr. Evans, who's on the call today, so it's always nice to see him again. And we worked through that, and within sort of a year I'd completed what I was supposed to do in the academic side of things, and things were progressing well. And Stirling Council at that time had an active salmon fishery that they managed for salmon fishing purposes and sort of recreation. So the fishery manager, who was my predecessor now, decided it was time for him to retire. And this was in 2014. And I'd been in the council sort of 2 years, still under an apprenticeship, and the opportunity came up for me to apply for the fishery manager's position. And this was a big step, you know, from an apprentice to being a fishery manager, and it revolved around sort of managing staff, managing budgets, managing permit holders, and sort of managing quite a lot of land. So I took that on in June 2014, and I was successful in securing that post. I then have been there ever since, and last year, June 2022, the council decided it was going to reintroduce a ranger service, and they approached me and asked if I would sort of manage them because of the background of where I'd come from, being an apprentice within the service previously. They thought I was sort of the best fit in the council to take that on. So my roles got sort of joined together, fisheries manager and sort of ranger service manager put together, and I was then in charge of a service where I started as an apprentice in 2012. So I kind of went full circle right the way around. And now my role has developed further into the council, and I kind of form part of the land services management team, where I look after 23 open space and countryside sites, the ranger service, the fishery service, what is left of it. I also look after some of our arbor team, and I help out with managing our horticulture and street cleansing teams as well. So quite a wide and varied post that I have now, but starting back when I think about when I wanted to leave school and I wanted to be a farrier, then a joiner, to now being part of sort of the land services management team at Stirling Council, you know, I'm a real advocate for no wrong path. And when people leave school and they have a vision and things don't work out, they can get a bit dejected. But, you know, it's about keeping your head up and carrying on of, you know, that things will work out, as they have for me. you know, looking back and thinking I wanted to be a farrier, then a joiner, then I worked in retail, to now sort of managing quite a big part of Stirling Council's environmental portfolio. If people want to come into this industry, and it's a fantastic industry to work in, I don't get out of the office very much anymore, unfortunately, but my staff on the ground are outside. You know, the outside is their office, and for them, it's a great way of life. It's not just a job, it's a passion, it's a way of life, and it's a job that to do it, you've got to enjoy it. It's not something you can just sort of pick up and run with. You've got to be interested, and I'm lucky enough that the staff that I manage really are. So touching on the fisheries stuff, the fisheries management sector to sort of Scottish economy is worth about £60 million a year, and that's quite big. It's a huge part of recreation, and with that, you know, fisheries management and sort of the recreation side of it comes hand in hand with hotels, restaurants, pubs, and sort of that sort of business. So that's where the £60 million worth of income to the Scottish economy comes from. If you wanted to work in this industry, you could be a gillie. A gillie is someone who will work on the river or on a loch, and their day-to-day job will be looking after clients. The clients will come to them with the aim of catching a fish, and the gillie will look after all their needs for the duration that they are there with them. You also could work in the fisheries sort of legislation and enforcement side of things, and you could be a bailiff, and that is you're there to protect and enhance the fish, whether that's in a reservoir or a loch, or whether that is salmon and sea trout within a river environment. And there's a whole section of Scottish law which protects salmon and sea trout, and as a bailiff or a fisheries enforcement officer, you would work to protect them using that legislation. Or you could be in a role that's like mine and be a fishery manager, and where my role, I was responsible for managing the bailiffs on the ground, looking after the budgets, making sure that I marketed the fishery properly and we could sell permits and then receive income. And that was my role, a bit like an estate factor. You could also be a biologist, and that is where, you know, it's a more academic role, where you've been to university and you've got a degree in biology or ecology, and you work within that sort of freshwater environment to look at how you can enhance and protect the sort of natural environment of the freshwater. If you wanted to work in the sort of environmental conservation side of things, you could be an ecologist, you could be a ranger, or you could work in the private sector as a consultant. You know, if you wanted to be an ecologist, it's there about the role. It's a bit like a biologist. It's an academic role, and it's about managing the relationships between the animals, the plants, and the people, and the environments that they live in, and providing advice to people like myself when we want to do projects and work around how we protect that environment that creature or special part of wildlife lives in. And if you wanted to be a ranger, it's quite a wide and varied role. My ranger service, I have 2 members of staff and a current apprentice, and they've all come from different backgrounds. My apprentice come from a background where he'd done a lot of volunteering, and he known from a young age that he wanted to work in the sort of outdoor environments. One of my other rangers, one of my full-time rangers, she actually has a master's degree in ecology. She came through the academic route and is a valuable part of my team. And my other full-time ranger, she come from a totally different sector completely and had a bit of a career change, and now is a very valued member of Stirling Council Ranger Service. And you know, their role is about managing areas of land and parks and open spaces for people, wildlife and plant life, and making sure that they all sort of correlate together and can sort of work in tandem. You know, at Stirling Council, I think we have 23 countryside sites, 1 country park, so it's about getting that right. You know, there are a lot of visitors there, but there's also a lot of areas of sort of scientific special interest, so we need to make sure that these are protected, along with allowing access to the members of the public. And if you want to be a consultant, that's more like the academic role of an ecologist, where you could work for a private sector company and provide them advice on a consultancy basis on major projects, whether that's like a roads project or a building project that they are working on, and you could do that and you move from sort of job to job. There's no fixed, you're not in one place for a very long time. You know, the UK government has pledged big commitments to support biodiversity in the sort of natural environment by 2030, and the Scottish Government as well has pledged these commitments through the Edinburgh's Agreement. And that takes me on to, you know, if people wanted to work in these industries, there's always been a thought previously that these industries are quite in silo. And, you know, if you work in agriculture, you work in agriculture or fisheries management, environmental conservation or trees and timber. But actually, they all cross over quite nicely. And, you know, my staff on the ground, they use chainsaws regularly, they use tractors and machinery. So it's an industry, especially the fisheries management one, whereas you'll be using equipment, although you work on the river or you work on a reservoir or a loch, you use equipment and tractors and chainsaws quite frequently. So, you know, these industries are not in silo anymore, and it'd be quite easy if you were working in one and decided that you wanted to move to another one to do that. You know, the crossover is quite easy. I've just seen a question come in there. Can you start with an apprenticeship and use that to get credit towards an academic qualification? I think the two of them, from my experience, the two of them are separate. And if you wanted to get an academic qualification, it's go to university or college and do that. My apprentices do an SVQ, usually I think it's level 2 and level 3. So that gives them a form of academic qualification that gives them a grounding if they wanted to go on and do more. You know, if they wanted to go on and do a HNC or a HND, or go back to uni and sort of do a master's. Another question coming: what skills do you need to get a job in fisheries management? The skills, you know, it's people based. So, you know, if you're a ghillie on the ground, you're working with a member of the public all day, every day. You're looking after their needs. If you're sort of enforcing fisheries legislation, you're working with people again. And me as a sort of fishery manager, I'm dealing with members of the public every day. So I think, you know, good communication skills is key. And, you know, being willing to learn and listen, especially as you come into sort of entry-level posts. It's what I tell my apprentices is be a sponge and absorb all information that they're given. So it's quite a practical job. So, you know, if you've got any experience in sort of outdoor work, or there's quite a bit of maintenance involved as well, using streamers and building boardwalks and decking along the side of paths and along the side of the river. So if you've got sort of hands-on experience, whether you've done joinery or anything at school or any work in the garden. And I think, you know, having a knowledge of fishing does help, but it's not necessarily that important, because, as I said, the entry-level post, be like a sponge, come in and learn. You know, we'll teach you everything you need to teach you. So I think that's the best bit of advice I can give anyone who wants to come into industry, is just be willing to learn. You know, these posts that we're speaking about, people are got to have an interest, and it's not something that people just decide one day and they wake up and say, oh, I want to be a ghillie or I want to be a bailiff, because you need to be interested and have a bit of passion about it. So I think that's the best advice I can give someone, is be interested and be like a sponge. I've not got much more else to say. If you want to open it up for questions, it's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So I'll hand it back to Rebecca, and if anyone wants to ask anything, or Rebecca can share my email address, and anyone can give me a call or drop me an email, and I can answer any questions offline if you can't think of any today.
Thank you very, very much for that, Scott. It was really interesting, and the fact that you managed to cover 2 of the sectors there, and it was really, really interesting as well to hear about your kind of experience, and also that career pathway, the thing we keep talking about. the way that you get into all these different qualifications and whether you can transfer them. And, you know, as you say, just be that sponge, take in all the information and, you know, just have that. You don't even necessarily need to have those initial skills. It's just having the passion and the willing to learn. If anybody's got any more questions, I'll leave the Q&A open for another wee minute there.
I think
we're starting to get back onto time there. Sorry, Scott, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I forgot to mention as well that one of the biggest things to get into these industries in both parts, environmental conservation and fisheries management, is volunteering. You know, I can't stress that enough, that if somebody is interested in becoming and working in sort of this environment, in this sector, get as much experience you can while you're sort of in the later years of school, or if you're at college, get as much volunteering as you can, go to your local ranger service and get some hours under your belt with them, or contact your sort of local fisheries trusts and get out with the biologists and get some hands-on practical experience. So